The concept of aristocracy is rooted in the idea of rule by the elite. For much of history, aristocratic systems have dominated many societies across the world, shaping not only politics but culture, economy, and social structures. In essence, aristocracy is defined by a political system in which power is concentrated in the hands of a few privileged individuals, typically those with noble bloodlines, significant wealth, and familial influence. Aristocratic rule is, at its core, a social and political structure grounded in inheritance, status, and tradition. Historically, aristocracies have been associated with monarchies, feudal systems, and even certain modern regimes where power is held by a small group of people. One of the most important aspects of aristocratic rule is how it preserves and maintains power through a combination of customs, laws, and inheritance. The first rule or guiding principle of aristocratic governance can be summed up in the phrase, "The aristocracy maintains its power through tradition and hereditary rule." This principle has held true for countless societies and continues to shape discussions about the role of aristocratic systems today. The historical foundation of aristocracies have existed in many forms throughout history. The Greek word aristokratia means rule by the best, and the concept of rule by an elite group has ancient origins. Early examples of aristocratic systems include the Greek city-states, medieval European feudal systems, and Asian dynasties. These societies were structured in such a way that a small group of elites held political and economic power, while the majority of people, peasants, laborers, and slaves, had little to no power or rights. One of the most enduring features of these aristocratic societies was the notion of hereditary rule. The aristocracy's power was often passed down through generations, making nobility a family legacy rather than an individual achievement. In medieval Europe, hereditary power, the bedrock of aristocracy, the second component of the rule of aristocracy is hereditary power. Aristocratic systems hinge on the assumption that the offspring of noble families inherit the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of their ancestors. In this sense, aristocracy is both a political and social system grounded in lineage. In societies where aristocracy flourished, children born into noble families were expected to continue the work of their forebears, often taking on leadership roles in governance, military service, or land stewardship. They were raised to rule and to preserve the systems that had been established by their ancestors. In monarchies, hereditary rule often took the form of a dynastic system, where power would pass from parent to child, typically following a clear order of succession. The preservation of the royal family's bloodline was paramount, as this was seen as the only legitimate way to govern. The notion of the divine right of kings reinforced this idea, suggesting that monarchs were chosen by God to rule, and thus their descendants had the right to inherit the throne. Similarly, in feudal Europe, land ownership and titles were passed down through generations, making it nearly impossible for non-nobles to enter the ruling class. The hereditary nature of aristocracy created a rigid class system, where status was largely determined at birth and social mobility was minimal. Aristocratic power in the modern world, while aristocratic systems have evolved and diminished in many parts of the world, their legacy continues to affect modern political structures. In some countries, aristocratic titles still carry significant social weight, even if their political power has waned. For example, the British peerage system still grants titles such as Duke, Baron, and Earl, even though the political influence of these titles has greatly diminished. In countries like the United Kingdom and Spain, aristocratic families continue to play prominent roles in society, often through philanthropy, culture, and business. Though these families no longer rule, their history of hereditary power and tradition continues to shape the public's perception of them. In some cases, aristocracy has been incorporated into constitutional systems. For example, the House of Lords in the United Kingdom once held legislative power, and while its influence has significantly diminished, it still plays a ceremonial and advisory role. Similarly, many European countries still have noble families that are considered part of the elite, though their political powers have largely faded. Conclusion: the endurance of aristocracy, the rule of aristocracy, particularly the first rule. The aristocracy maintains its power through tradition and hereditary rule, has been a defining feature of many societies throughout history. This system of governance is based on a belief in the legitimacy of inherited power and the preservation of social structures through tradition. Although aristocracy has transformed over the centuries, its legacy continues to influence the political, social, and cultural landscapes of many modern nations. Understanding the rule of aristocracy, especially its reliance on tradition and hereditary power, provides valuable insights into how societies organize themselves and how power dynamics are sustained. Even as democratic principles have taken hold in many parts of the world, the remnants of aristocratic systems remain a fascinating aspect of global history, influencing everything from social stratification to political institutions. In a modern context, the aristocracy may no longer govern in the traditional sense, but its influence persists in cultural norms, elite institutions, and even economic power structures. The rule of aristocracy remains a reminder of how power can be passed down through generations, preserved through tradition, and entrenched within social systems.